Hi, I'm Dr. Paul and welcome back to Chiropractic Marketing Assistant. This is the video training series that helps with training chiropractic assistants. And we go into specific jobs, responsibilities, duties, basically help to make the position easier, much more satisfactory, and have it to where everybody can work together to achieve a common goal. Now, so we'll cover several topics. Again, from answering the phone, to scheduling patients, to processing patients, to, of course, marketing. We'll go in all the marketing concepts and responsibilities and things like that. What they're called primary, secondary versus tertiary responsibilities. But we're going to cover a lot of different categories that make up the chiropractic assistant position. And again, it's to make life just that much easier. It's always easier when you know what to do and how to do it. It's much more enjoyable and much more effective. So the topic we're going to go in today is why chiropractic marketing. Why chiropractic marketing? So let me just share with you some basic information here with chiropractic. And here's the reality of it is, chiropractic's been around since 1985, 120 plus years. But there's only 8% utilization. There's only 8% utilization. In other words, every year, only 8% of the population chooses chiropractic. Now, does that mean that the rest of the population does not have a problem that chiropractic can help? No, that's not what it means at all. And then you go, well, why is that? Why is it only 8%? Well, that's what I'm going to share with you right now. Why is it that the chiropractic profession, after 120 plus years, has only an 8% utilization, and unfortunately, a 67% negative name recognition? So that doesn't help at all. And I'm going to share with you right now the two main reasons of exactly why that has happened. Now, before we do that, let me share with you this statistic also. So if we said 8% of the population only seeks chiropractic annually, well, that means 92% don't. And again, does that mean 92% do not have problems that chiropractors can help? No, it's not what it means at all. As a matter of fact, this gets really interesting. Out of that 92%, the remainder, 3 out of 4 people in that category have what is typically called a chiropractic problem. Now, let me go back to this chiropractic problem here. So in other words, what's the main reasons after 120 plus years people go to chiropractors? What's the statistics? What are the national statistics? And by the way, this is from the National Institute of Health. Did the largest study ever of alternative healthcare professions. And that's where all this information comes from. So 84% of the reason that 8% will go to chiropractors is for the category of neuromusculoskeletal. So that's the healthcare category, neuromusculoskeletal, and the number one in that category is back pain. So it's back pain, neck pain, and headaches. Those are the top 3 reasons. That's 84% of the reason that people will go to a chiropractor. Okay, now that's after 120 plus years. Now, the next, say, 7%, so 84% is back pain, neck pain, headaches. The next 7% is still under the category of neuromusculoskeletal, but it's extremities now. So we're talking about shoulder injuries, elbow, wrist, knee, feet, things like that. A lot of people don't know chiropractors help with shoulder, knee problems, things like that. Well, that's 7%, so that's not a big number. So only 7% of 8%, okay? Now, that leaves, so we're up to 91. So 91% of the reason why patients will naturally pick a chiropractor, that 8%, is for the category of neuromusculoskeletal, okay? And primarily back and neck pain. Now, that remaining 9% of the 8%, those people will see chiropractors for what are called somatovisceral reflex conditions. Now, what does that mean? They will see chiropractors for things that you might see as unusual or weird, depending on your background. But that's when they'll get treated for things like asthma, allergies, bedwetting, colic. Those are 4 common areas, okay? But here's the situation. In other words, do chiropractors routinely see those problems? No. Is that what the public sees chiropractic is treating? No. As a matter of fact, it's only 9% of 8%. So remember, we're talking about a real small number. So remember, only 8% of the population seeks chiropractic care. Out of that, only 9% gets treated for a non-neuromusculoskeletal condition, which is called a somatovisceral reflex, such as asthma, allergy, bedwetting, colic, things like that. Visceral, okay? Which most people, that really creates a huge paradigm shift. So now, what's even more interesting about that 9%, so first of all, it's a real small number, of a small number. But what's also interesting about that 9% is 80% of the people in that category did not proactively go to a chiropractor for asthma, allergy, bedwetting, or colic. That's not. What happened with 80% of that number is they went to the chiropractor for back pain, neck pain, and headaches. And while they were there, the chiropractor did some patient education and explained this thing called a somatovisceral reflex. Now in chiropractic, chiropractors call that subluxations. And a subluxation is essentially what's called a somatovisceral reflex. What that means, very simply, is when you have nerve pressure in the spine that causes a reflex arc within the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is part of your nervous system that goes to your organs. And essentially, it's like the stop-start of your organs. So it can either increase secretion, decrease it, increase vasodilation, decrease it, increase circulation, decrease it, okay? So that's kind of how it works. That's the autonomic, in other words, it's the start-stop. And a real classic example is asthma. Well, asthma is a constriction of the vessels. And it's usually, there's many different reasons for asthma. But on occasion, if it's from, the constriction is from nerve pressure that's creating a stimulus to the system that's saying nerve or lungs to contract, then you'll have asthma. You'll have difficulty breathing. And a chiropractic adjustment, believe it or not, if it's a somatovisceral reflex, can stimulate that somatovisceral reflex to get the lungs to dilate, to stimulate the autonomic nervous system to dilate, which helps alleviate asthma. That's a real simple example of a somatovisceral reflex, okay? Now, here's the point. A very small percent, only 9% of 8%, get treated for somatovisceral reflexes like asthma, allergy, bedwetting, colic, okay? Now, of that, 80% of those did not seek chiropractic care for that. So when they came in for back pain, neck pain, and headaches, the chiropractor basically did what's called patient education and explained, how the autonomic nervous systems work. And they are a family member who had asthma, allergy, bedwetting, colic, something like that, said, well, can you help my family member? And I'm kind of dumbing it down to make it simple, but that's kind of what happened. And then the chiropractor said, well, let me check him out. So that's how it works. That's where, so in other words, 80% of the 9% did not come from patients recognizing chiropractors as treating visceral problems at all. Matter of fact, most people would think that's weird. They go, and by the way, in just a second, you'll see why. So that is now only 20% of 9% of 8%. So you got to realize what kind of a small number we're talking about. Actually has a concept after 120 years that they think chiropractic can help with asthma, allergy, or bedwetting, and actually went to a chiropractor for that. Now, I will tell you, I practice, in all the years I practiced, in all the offices I practiced, again, I had 77 offices in 20 states. We saw over 600,000 patient visits a year. We never had a new patient come in that I'm aware of that came to one of our offices, or my office, and said, hey, can you help me with asthma? Can you help me with allergies? Can you help me with bedwetting? Can you help my child with colic? Never. And my point is, it's a real small number. That's my point, okay? All right, so having said that, and one of 5, but the vast majority of people have what chiropractors are really good at. Chiropractors are really good at what's called mechanical back pain. Mechanical, when the bones don't move right. That's mechanical back pain, okay? Chiropractors are actually the best at it. So out of that 92% that's not seeking chiropractic care, what do? Well, 3 out of 4 of them have a chiropractic problem. They have back pain, neck pain, headaches, and here's how we know that. Is the second leading cause that a patient will go to a general practitioner is for back pain. So they're driving by chiropractors' offices every day, going to a general practitioner who hasn't had any education on mechanical back pain. That's where they're going. It's the second leading cause of the emergency room. The reason people go to the emergency room, back pain. And the studies have shown that 99 out of 100 people that go to the emergency room for back pain have mechanical back pain. In other words, what we treat when the bones don't move properly. They don't have what's called organic back pain. In other words, from a tumor or an infection, something like that. So 99 out of 100 is a chiropractic problem, okay? And we know that it's the second leading workers' compensation injury, back pain. And we know it's the #1 reason people take over-the-counter medication like ibuprofen, Motrin, things like that, is from joint pain. And we know that joint pain, arthritis, is the #1 disability in the United States. Well, that's what chiropractors treat, joint pain. And it's the primary cause is from osteoarthritis. So that's what chiropractors treat. So out of this 92%, does that mean none of them have back pain, neck pain, headaches, arthritis? That's not at all what it means. What it means is 3 out of 4 of them do have that problem. They're getting treatment in every other method except chiropractic. That's what it means. And I'm going to share with you why right now. Why is there this massive amount of people that have back pain, neck pain, arthritis, joint pain? And chiropractic has already shown it's the best at treating biomechanical joint dysfunction, okay? That's what chiropractors are the best at. That's been shown over and over again. So why is it that you have such a large group of people who are not seeking chiropractic care? Well, that's what I'm going to share with you right now. There's 2 real reasons. Let me go into the first one. The first reason is there was the American Medical Association back in the early 60s created a organization, a sub-organization called the Committee on Quackery. This was back in 1963, I believe. And the whole goal of that committee was to contain and eliminate the chiropractic profession. That was the goal. Now, all of this was internal. None of this was public. In other words, the AMA tried to totally eliminate chiropractic as a profession without being public about it. And they targeted, it was a very strategic plan, and it worked real well for quite a while until they were caught. So how they did that is they made it unethical for medical doctors to associate or refer to chiropractors. Now remember, this is the early mid-60s. They made it to where hospitals would not accept chiropractors on staff. They also made it to where chiropractors, they tried to cut student loans, government student loans, to stop potential students from going to chiropractic college and graduating. Those were 3. There was many things they did, but those were the 3 real big ones they did. And it was pretty effective. So they created a tremendous amount of misinformation to destroy this profession, the chiropractic, and that's what it's called, the Committee on Quackery. And what happened is in the early 70s, the notes of all of these programs, in other words, they were trying to monopolize the profession, and that's illegal. That's illegal. Well, in the early 70s, this information got leaked to a few leaders in the chiropractic profession. And so what happened, there was a group of chiropractors that got together and they sued the American Medical Association. Now remember, the American Medical Association is a huge organization, very wealthy. So the name of that suit was called Wilk, W-I-L-K, versus the AMA. And it was Dr. Chester Wilk. He was a chiropractor who led it. Him and essentially 3 other chiropractors were named in the suit out of Chicago, and their attorney was George McAndrews, whose brother was a chiropractor. So they sued the MA, and basically what happened, it took many years for this to go through court and all that, but essentially what happened is in 1987 they were found guilty. Now this is 1987, so this was not very long ago. So in 1987, the judge ruled that they were guilty of what's called violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. And what that means is they were guilty of trying to eliminate a competitor. And they did it by a lot of ways. Well, one of the ways was disparaging the competitor. And that was from what's called the Committee on Quackery. Okay? So the profession of chiropractic got a really bad name, especially during that time period. Well, that seriously hurt the participation of patients going to chiropractors. The medical doctor said don't go. They weren't in hospitals. They tried to cut student loans. They had negative propaganda out on chiropractic. So that seriously hurt the branding or name recognition, and that's one reason the chiropractic profession is at only 8% utilization after 120 years. That's not the main reason, though. The second reason is what's called a violation. Chiropractors actually shoot themselves in the foot because they violate. When you try to get more people to use the product or service, you try to increase your name recognition in a good way. Well, chiropractors violate the #1 rule in marketing. The #1 rule in marketing is be something very specific to a very specific target market. That's the first rule in marketing. Well, chiropractors don't do that. They try to claim everything. And the reason they do that is because of this thing called the somatovisceral reflex, or what chiropractors call subluxations. So here's the bad news, and I'll give you a simple analogy. So here, chiropractors are generally known as helping with back problems, but there's only 8% utilization, even though the vast majority of people have back pain, headaches, neck pain, etc., arthritis. But they're not going to chiropractors, even though the chiropractic profession is the best at treating those problems. So that's one problem, and it's because of what's called a paradigm shift. So there's 4 negative things that happen when there's a paradigm shift. And in other words, when somebody claims something that's different, significantly different than what would be considered normal. So trust and defenses go down. Trust and confidence goes down, and defenses and resistance go up. That's what happens. And so when a chiropractor says, hey, now remember, they're somewhat known as treating back pain. Remember, 84% of the reason people go to chiropractors is back pain, neck pain, headaches. And remember, the category is neuromusculoskeletal. 91% of the 8% go to chiropractors because they see them as treating neuromusculoskeletal conditions, not all these other claims. So you have a group of chiropractors who now start promoting this thing called subluxation. And they start saying, hey, we can help with asthma, allergies, and bedwetting. Well, at a very small level, if it's from a somatovisceral reflex, that's true. Only the chiropractic adjustment can help. But if it's not from a somatovisceral reflex, chiropractors cannot help at all. And the vast majority of these problems are not from somatovisceral reflexes. In other words, if we took 100 people with asthma, 100 people with bedwetting, they would not be from a somatovisceral reflex. In other words, if chiropractors treated all of them, and studies have shown over and over, the vast majority of those people would not respond. But there is a very small percentage of people, and usually it falls around the placebo effect. But there is a very small percentage of people that do have a somatovisceral reflex. That's in other words, nerve in the spine area through a reflex arc is affecting the autonomic nervous system, affecting one of the visceral organs. That does happen, but it just happens on a real small level. But unfortunately, you have a small group of chiropractors that now start saying all that. So here chiropractic is known as back pain, and so you have a group of chiropractors over here saying, we can help cancer. We can help your immune system. We can help allergies, asthma, bedwetting. In other words, they say everything. Any health condition at all, they say we can help through this thing called subluxation. If we correct the subluxation, it helps that, okay? But that's not what's causing all those problems. And I'll give you an example. There's people I've treated that had asthma that was helped, okay, through chiropractic care. Did they come to me for that? No. They came to me for back pain, and through their history, I found out that they had asthma. Now, did the majority of people, when I took their histories, because they typically would come to me for back pain, neck pain, and when I found out they had asthma, did the majority of those people get better with their asthma when I treated them? No. I'll just tell you right now, they did not. Did I help a few people with asthma? Yeah. I remember one example I'll share with you is I remember I had an automobile accident patient, and we were treating her for neck pain and back pain. And in one of the very first treatments, we treated her. She walks outside the office, comes right back in and says, "What did you do?" I said, "What do you mean, what did I do?" "You know, we treated you like so." She says, "I can smell now." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Years ago, I had some trauma, and I lost all my sense of smell. I couldn't smell." And she goes, I tried everything and nothing helped." She said, "As soon as you adjusted me, I walked outside and I can smell. This is the first time I can smell flowers in 10 years. Now, this is a true story. And what that is what that was a somatovisceral reflex. That's all it was, okay? In other words, she didn't come to me because she couldn't smell. She didn't even tell me. I didn't even know. So it was by an accident, me treating her neck, we helped to essentially relieve the pressure, affected the autonomic nervous system to where she could actually smell. That's called a somatovisceral reflex. That's what that's called. Does that mean everybody who can't smell has a somatovisceral reflex? No. Matter of fact, you'll see, a really, really, really small, really small percentage of people, that's from a somatovisceral reflex. But the bad news is chiropractors will promote that. They will say, yeah, we can help all these. And personally, to be honest with you, I think that's irresponsible. I think it's irresponsible for any profession that helps something on a real small level to say, yeah, we routinely can help that. I think that's irresponsible. But that's the problem. So now when you have chiropractors saying, hey, we can help asthma, allergy, and bedwetting, it violates the first law of marketing. The first law of marketing is called the law of line extension. You want to be something to somebody. And I'll give you a really good example. Well, if I asked you what KFC sold, you'd probably say chicken. If I said, what does Taco Bell sell? You'd probably say tacos. If I said, what does Pizza Hut sell? You'd probably say pizza. And then what if I said, what if KFC now said, we're going to start selling cars? In other words, they totally changed the category from food, and not just food, but chicken. They totally changed the category. That's called a paradigm shift. That's why it creates a negative reaction. So you see, soon as I say that, the defenses and resistance go up and trust and confidence goes down. And what if I said Taco Bell is actually going to start giving flu shots? That's called a paradigm shift. Could Taco Bell give flu shots? Sure, they could. They got enough money to do flu shots. Could KFC start selling cars? Yeah. Could Pizza Hut start selling computers? Yeah. Does that mean now that you'll go to Pizza Hut for computers, you'll go to Taco Bell for a flu shot, and you'll go to KFC for cars? You see how ridiculous this is? And I always explain this to chiropractors. I say, people will go to a dentist for their teeth. They don't go to a dentist for asthma. They'll go for their teeth. And I said, what if the patient goes and sits down in the chair and the dentist says, I see on your chart you have asthma. And then he pulls out this it's called a meridian chart of the teeth. And it shows where the meridians of the teeth go to different areas of the body, and one particular area in the molar goes to the lungs. And what if, so you go to the dentist with a tooth problem, and you're sitting there, and the dentist says, oh, I see in your history you have asthma. He goes, I think we can help you with your asthma. And he points to the chart and says, you see your molars? There's meridians from your molars down to your lungs. So I think we can stimulate that meridian and help you with your asthma. Now, if you're the patient sitting in the chair, what just happened to your trust? Did it go up or down? It just went down. What just happened to your confidence? It just went down. What just happened to your resistance? It just went up. What just happened to your defenses? It just went up. See, that's what happens when there's a paradigm shift. That's a paradigm shift. Now, here's the bad news. Because of what just happened, do you even want the dentist working on your teeth now? See, now all that distrust has now been transferred over to his ability to work on your teeth. And you don't even want him to work on your teeth now. That is exactly as what happened to the chiropractic profession over 120 years. So it's a combination of being targeted as a quackery cult through the Committee on Quackery and the AMA. So they purposely targeted it that way. And chiropractors, where there's this function called a somatovisceral reflex, that is a paradigm shift. It's a real paradigm shift. For me to say to somebody, I can adjust your neck and get your sense of smell back. See, that's one heck of a paradigm shift. There is a thing called a somatovisceral reflex. It's well established, but it's not the majority of the problems. And it's one heck of a paradigm shift. Just like KFC could sell cars. They got enough money to sell cars, but they don't sell cars. So if in other words, if they did sell cars, they would break it off and brand it separately, and they wouldn't call it KFC. They'd call it Hyundai, you see. So this has to do with perception. So you got two big problems there. There's one is the majority of people don't have these problems. It's not from a somatovisceral reflex. Number two is it's one heck of a paradigm shift. So when you combine that with the AMA and the Committee on Quackery, here you are, 120 plus years later with only 8% utilization, and out of the 92% that does not see chiropractors, 25% of them don't have a chiropractic problem, like back pain, neck pain, arthritis. So not everybody has back pain, neck pain, arthritis. But a vast majority of people do. Matter of fact, arthritis is the #1 disability, and 1 in 5 people have it. That's a chiropractic. We help joint pain, especially spinal joint pain. We're really good at spinal dysfunction and spinal joint pain. So you've got this 92%. So you got this massive amount of people over here, this 92%. Just imagine if they went to the dentist and the dentist said, hey, and they pointed to the meridian chart and said, I think I can help with your asthma. That's what's happened to this large 92%. And that's why there's only 8% utilization and 67% negative name recognition. And unfortunately, we won the AMA lawsuit. But it's hard to overcome somebody who's already been damaged and called a name. It's hard to overcome that. There's ways to do it. But the other problem in how it keeps perpetuating and why it doesn't go away is you still have a small group of chiropractors claiming that they can help cancer. That you still have a small group of chiropractors that say they can help asthma, allergy, bedwetting, women's problems, immune problems. In other words, anything in your body, they say, yeah, we can help because we can help this thing called a somatovisceral reflex, even though the vast majority of people, that's not what causes those problems, number one. And number two, even if that small percent does, it's no different than KFC selling cars or Taco Bell selling computers. There's no difference. It creates one heck of a mixed message. And so they don't even want to come to you for chicken anymore. They don't even want to come to the dentist for the tooth if that's what he's doing. And they don't want to come to Pizza Hut if they're selling computers. Okay? So you're not even good at chicken, tacos, or pizza. That's exactly what's happened to the chiropractic profession. So having said that, that's why we pay a lot of attention to marketing. That's why there's 8% utilization, 92%. But remember, there's huge opportunity. Out of that 92%, 3 out of 4 of those people have back pain, neck pain, headaches, arthritis. So there's a massive amount of potential patients suffering, having healing wrong, ending up with permanent problems the rest of their life simply because they didn't go to a chiropractor. That's a big problem. So what we do is we want to make sure we treat the 8% properly. We want to give them good service. We want to give them good fees. We want to make it affordable. We want to respect their time. But what we want to do for that 92% is 3 out of 4 of them, we want to reach out to those. That's called marketing. We're going to reach out to those and get those as patients, because that's way more than 8%. And that is exactly how I was able to grow from 1 office to 77 offices in 20 states, seeing over 600,000 patient visits a year, becoming the world's largest chiropractic provider. Because we would never have been able to do it if we just focused on the 8%. So we do have to know the basics of marketing to get the 3 out of 4 of the 92%. To get them to come into us so we can help minimize their problems, solve their problems, and prevent permanent injuries, as opposed to just being medicated, and then end up with arthritis 5-10 years later, as 1 in 5 people do. So that's what we're doing. But I just wanted to take just a few minutes to share with you about this thing called marketing, market utilization, why there's confusion. So in other words, in our offices, we're not going to create confusion. We're going to use what's called the gateways. We're going to treat people for the reasons that they see chiropractic helping: back pain, neck pain, headaches, disc, sciatica, carpal tunnel, things like that. We're not going to create confusion, because that destroys relationships. It destroys relationships. And then we're going to give them good service, and we're going to make it affordable. And that's how we see a lot of people, and we help a lot of people. Those are the systems we're going to teach.